Here is why I think Wubuntu Linux is a scam. Wubuntu Linux is a new Linux distribution developed and maintained by LinuxFX, which haven't had a bright history when it comes to keeping user data concealed. There have been database leaks that have leaked thousands, if not millions of users' email addresses, phone numbers, and credit card or PayPal credentials. This issue is one they have been trying to address, but it doesn't seem like their efforts are working to eradicate the problem. And this distro is not just shady when it comes to business practices, there is a whole host of other shady stuff they do as well, and from what I have heard, this distro is a one-man distro. It is only developed and maintained by a single person, but I find that a bit hard to believe, even if that's actually the case, because operating systems are so complex and usually requires a team of developers to maintain and distribute the operating system. For example, Ubuntu is owned and distributed by Canonical, and Canonical offer many services and products to their users. Canonical is not quite the same as Microsoft in terms of power and wealth, but they have more power than you or me, or anyone else for that matter. But what I am saying is that Ubuntu, and most other Linux distributions, are usually maintained by a team of developers, but in this case, it seems that only one person is developing and distributing this Linux distro, and while I find it hard to believe, it's also somewhat seemingly the case. I've watched a few in-depth videos on Wubuntu, covering the company's shady tactics and practices, and it sounds like only one person is actually behind the creation of this Linux distro. So it has to be a one-man type Linux distro. If that's the case, perhaps a better word would be a one-developer distro. Wubuntu has several things which I do not like one bit. I will cover these things in just a moment. I have recently tried Wubuntu on my HP desktop computer, and honestly speaking, I actually really like the design of the user interface. Being an ex-Windows user, it helps me familiarize myself with the Linux environment. But at the same time, I also prefer something that's original and new, something with a non-Microsoft, non-Apple, non-Google vibe to it, if you know what I mean. Despite this, I really do adore the UI of Wubuntu. The developer did a great job at mimicking the look and feel of both Windows 10 and Windows 11. I prefer the Windows Ubuntu 11 Plasma edition as it looks and feels, and even acts like Windows 11. And while it is not 100% like the real thing, it's pretty darn close in terms of look and feel. The File Explorer even has tabbed files and notes, which is a key feature of Windows 11, so good job on incorporating such features. That's excellent. It might actually get some Windows users interested in trying this distro. But if you soon see the dirty practices and tactics of this developer, you might change your mind. I am not hating on the developer. And I am not trying to hate on the developer or crap on his or her Linux distribution. I am simply expressing my personal opinion on this Linux distro, and why I personally think there are better distros to go with, should you want to trial a Linux distribution, or you want to migrate from Windows or Mac OS over to Linux. Such distros include Linux Mint, Peppermint OS, Ubuntu, Xubuntu or Ubuntu for less powerful PCs and laptops, Linux Lite, and Pop! OS, are some of my top recommendations for new users who want to switch to Linux, but there are plenty of other great distros as well. There is a website called Distro Watch that contains most, if not, all Linux distributions, so you can find out about different distros, their specific features, and so on and so forth, and see which one best suits your specific needs, wants, and preferences. Wubuntu also does a nice job at incorporating a Microsoft-like ecosystem, with the inclusion of Microsoft Edge, Microsoft Copilot, formerly Bing Chat, Microsoft Teams desktop client, etc., but there's a chunk of free and open-source applications built into Wubuntu as well, such as VLC Media Player, Audacity, OnlyOffice, which is a viable alternative Office suite to Microsoft Office, but it should not be the included replacement to replace the official Microsoft Office desktop application. I will tell you why later on in the video, and it has other free software as well, not to mention the inclusion of the Android emulator which we see in the real Windows 11, which will let you run Android apps inside of Linux, but you can easily do that on any distro. provided it meets the app's requirements to run on that distro and specific hardware, and the other free software already is available to all Linux distros, so it's not exactly a mind-blowing or game-changing Linux distro, but still, I do like the inclusion of Copilot. Microsoft Edge. I rarely use Edge. I don't like it because it's full of bloat and unnecessary features. Like Microsoft Windows, Microsoft Edge is also bloatware. I would much rather Mozilla Firefox or at least the Chromium browser, which is a Google Chrome, and is the underlying base for other browsers such as Opera, Brave, Vivaldi, etc. Firefox would have been a better default browser. However, since many use Google products and services, there is a constant need to access and have convenient access to your Google account, so you might want to use Google Chrome, or the unofficial Chromium. Chromium is an open-source project which is the underlying base for many web browsers, including Google's own browser, Chrome, Microsoft Edge, Opera, Brave, and so on, and so Chromium might be better for tight synchronization across your devices. Or if you want plain Google Chrome, just download that from Google's website. There are online links to Microsoft Office in the Ubuntu 11 Start menu, however, they just redirect you to the Microsoft Office Online page, and as you may know, Microsoft Office Online is feature limited. The desktop application is what most professionals use. And so if this Linux distro was to try and at least attempt to be a true alternative to Microsoft's proprietary operating system, it would include a legitimate copy of Microsoft Office, but the issue is that Microsoft Windows, and all Microsoft products and services, are a copyright trademark that is owned by Microsoft, and they are protected by existing copyright laws, which can punish people who use such things without the explicit permission of that person or company. And in this case, Microsoft Office, Edge, Copilot, etc., are being distributed without Microsoft's consent, which could potentially violate an existing copyright law, and see the developer face a legal battle with Microsoft, although this is not likely to happen as this distro cannot possibly pose a threat to Microsoft Windows market share and dominance. Wubuntu also offers a Windows 10 themed edition for those who prefer the look and feel of Windows 10, and it is designed to run better on lower-end hardware. I also tried this edition on my PC, and it ran really well. It ran slightly better than the Windows Ubuntu 11 Plasma edition, probably because my system has older generation RAM, a hard drive, and isn't exactly a new PC with a new and speedy processor, RAM, or an SSD. But it is what I need, and that is all that matters to me. The Windows 10 edition of Wubuntu is probably better for Windows 10 users migrating to Linux. I am not trying to say this is a viable alternative to Windows, but those who are interested in this Linux distribution should definitely try it out. You can create a live USB, CD or DVD, and use that as bootable media, to boot into the Wubuntu operating system, where you can then test it out. Try different apps and features, and see how well it runs on your PC. You should thoroughly test a Linux distro before installing it on any hardware, as you want to ensure it will work with your hardware without any major hiccups or problems, and you will also want to see whether you like the look, feel, and operation of the operating system. If you don't, then do not install it. Simple. Windows Ubuntu 11 Cinnamon Edition, which is the Windows 10 themed edition, also includes the same apps and services that the Windows 11 themed edition has. However, the File Explorer does not have the nice new features of the Windows Ubuntu 11 Plasma edition, and so if you want the most modern operating system in terms of aesthetics, Windows Ubuntu 11 Plasma edition is the better choice. But for those that are more used to a Windows 10-like environment, obviously the Windows Ubuntu 11 Cinnamon edition is the better choice. And there is a different edition called Linux FX, the same name as the company behind this distro. The Linux FX edition does not come with Microsoft Edge, Copilot, Teams, and other Microsoft apps or services. However, you can still use Power Toys, excuse me for a moment, Power Tools, provided you pay for what I would call an absolute rip-off price. To unlock extra functionality in the Wubuntu operating system, users must pay a fee of $35 to purchase a single license, which they can then verify in the Wubuntu operating system, and then unlock the extra features. However, I personally think this is scammy behavior, because Linux is free and open source software, and the developer wants to charge a fee in order for us to use the operating system to its fullest extent, and without purchasing that power tool's professional license key. It does somewhat cripple the Wubuntu operating system, but only if you really want those extra features that are advertised on the Wubuntu website. I will leave a link to the official Wubuntu website down in the description below, in case you would like to check it out and see what this distro is all about. Now, the developer says this is to support development and funding, and I cannot doubt that for a second. Free and open source software developers often rely on open donations from the community, since most organizations are non-profit organizations. Such organizations include the GIMP Foundation, Videolan, the LibreOffice Foundation, and so on and so forth, and the Wubuntu team might also be a non-profit organization. So if that's the case, I can totally see why the developer would ask for you to purchase a premium product key to unlock more features. The money is supposedly used to fund and support their project, and develop better and more useful resources, but this is more likely just a bit of tongue-in-cheek to catch you into purchasing a product key for this Linux distro, and places such as CD Key Sales sell Windows keys for less than a single license for the Wubuntu operating system, so some would consider this a scam, myself included. But according to my voting poll where I asked you viewers if you thought Wubuntu is a scam, most of the viewers said yes, with some saying no, so it tells me that more people think this is a scam than not. I have been seeing YouTube videos saying this distro is a scam. I even made my own video about Wubuntu being a scam, but for all intensive purposes, I would not classify this as a scam, because the reason behind the donations is totally okay and usable in such cases, and what this developer is really asking for is a big donation, rather than a small donation of $5 or $10. 35 is not exactly big, but it's a lot more than 5 or 10, and the more money, the more the developer can spend on developing their software. So I do encourage people who use free and open source software to donate to their respective developers. You can really help these guys develop and distribute their software and make it better. Even $10 will go a long way in terms of development of free and open source software. So if you have some change to spare, why not donate it to your favorite software developers? Do an act of charity, and you will be greatly thanked by your free and open source community. So, would I recommend Wubuntu Linux for a newcomer who is switching to Linux? Unfortunately, it's a bit hard for me to say a straight yes or no, without delving into the reasons as to why I recommend it or not, but for me, some issues are too big of an issue for me to really recommend this, and I will go over these issues right now. Firstly, Wubuntu advertises itself as a Windows-like operating system, with enticing and convincing texture and images. It hooks gullible Windows users into thinking that this Linux operating system can replace their proprietary operating system, which is owned and controlled by Microsoft. However, we have seen many distros attempt to do this in the past. The infamous Windows Linux distro was a famous distro that was introduced around the same time as Windows XP, and it was meant to be a direct competitor to Windows, offering a free and open source alternative to those using Microsoft's operating system. However, Wine, a piece of software used to run Windows applications and programs in Linux, has always been substandard when it comes to giving Windows users the real experience of using Windows software in a Windows-like environment. Wine translates Windows apps into a format that Linux and Unix-like operating systems can understand, and Wine tries to eliminate latency and major problems people generally encounter when running their software through compatibility layers. However, Wine is not a Swiss Army knife. It cannot run every bit of Windows software in existence. Some apps work well, some will refuse to work at all, and some will run with minor issues, but overall, it's not the recommended way to use software on Linux. and so distros that advertise themselves as being a Windows alternative often lead to huge disappointment from the Windows and Linux communities, especially new Linux users who have just switched from Windows to Linux. Finding out that your software does not support Linux, and does not run inside a compatibility layer, would be extremely frustrating and make you revert back to Windows, and that's exactly what Windows did. Wubuntu is likely going to do the same thing, if it gets lots of Windows users hooked. And the thing is, not 0.000000001% of Windows users will get hooked. We all know that Linux is not Windows, and vice versa, and the two are completely different things, designed to do different things, and if anything, Linux is purpose-built, meaning it serves a specific purpose. For example, some distros offer lots of privacy and security tools to let you become more private online, and do a wide range of tasks which require those tools, but every distro is different. Some are aimed at novice users switching to Linux, some are a do-it-yourself project that let you work on the distro from the ground up, literally, and there are some distros which focus on hacking, security research, privacy, anonymity, etc. Ubuntu cannot replace Windows, even with the inclusion of Wine to run Windows software. Wine cannot run many Windows applications and games, and what about gaming? Nope, Windows games will not work out of the box on Linux. You can use something called ProtonDB, which is included in the Steam client on Linux, but games that are fought with anti-cheat issues will not work on Linux through this compatibility layer. So once again, not a viable solution to running Windows games on Linux. And sure, there are some cool native titles which you can download and play right inside of Linux, but the majority of those games are not what people want. Most people want the latest and greatest games, and those are almost always only for Windows, rarely ever for Mac, and almost never for Linux. So you Linux fanboys kinda need to accept that Linux just does not cut the mustard for Windows users, at least a good majority of them. Some have successfully switched to Linux, and have since never looked back upon using Windows. Most abandon Windows once they switch to a non-Microsoft operating system, unless they need it for specific reasons. Most people also want something that's easy to use, and works out of the box. And while Wine and ProtonDB definitely have proven to be useful utilities for those who need them, they still don't always work for absolutely everything, and that's always going to be the case, no matter how many people use Linux, unless Linux somehow becomes as popular, if not, more popular than Windows and Mac OS. It would give developers way more incentive to port their software over to Linux, but Microsoft and Apple would likely buy Linux out, as if they would let Linux become more popular than their desktop and mobile operating systems. Microsoft, Apple, and Google are all monopolies, which means they have the capital, resources, and market share, which makes it impossible for someone who distributes free and open-source software to compete, let alone take over Windows and Mac OS and market share, to possibly pose a threat to those corporations. But Linux will never become anywhere near as mainstream or as widely used on desktops and laptops as Mac OS, Windows, and even Google's Chrome OS. Also, remember how I said the inclusion of only Office is bad? Well, if you're a die-hard Microsoft Office user who absolutely needs everything that Microsoft Office has to offer, then only Office is not going to do the job for you, despite being compatible with Microsoft Office files, including Word, Excel, and PowerPoint files. It's not the be-all and end-all solution. Only Office might be a great Office suite to use if you wish to not use Microsoft Office, or you don't need all the bells and whistles Microsoft Office has to offer, so it's a viable alternative to those who don't need MS Office features. But those that do will be largely let down to see that Microsoft Office is not the included Office suite in Ubuntu Linux. Even with the inclusion of online links, this does not compensate for the lack of an official version of Microsoft Office installed on the Linux operating system. Through a compatibility layer such as Wine, Wine can run various different versions of Microsoft Office, both old and new, and if this distro includes Wine, why not have some Windows applications preloaded with Wine? That would be better than catching them with bait and chucking them into a net to pay $35 for a single license key that costs more than a cheap Windows 11 Professional or Home Edition key from places such as CD key sales. And so, this now lands us on the final part of this video, the conclusion of this Linux distro. While this distro, at least in my opinion, really does a good job at imitating the official user interface of both Windows 10 and Windows 11, and the inclusion of some Microsoft apps and services is nice for those who may need them, it is not a Windows substitute operating system. It does not function like Windows, even though it looks and feels a lot like Windows. It is not Windows, and no matter how much compatibility stuff you shove into a Linux distro, it ain't gonna cut it for every Windows program. Virtual machines are no better. You will also run into problems if the software is demanding on your computer's resources, and needs access to graphics cards or other peripherals or ports. And on a surface level, it sounds nice to be able to run .exe and .msi files right off the bat, but in actual reality, this does not work to your advantage. If anything, it is a pain in the butt to get working, and sometimes, you may need to use backwards compatibility to run an older bit of Windows software. And even then, it may not work. So what this Linux distro is essentially a Linux distro which says it's free, and it is, but without paying that $35 fee, you cannot or and will not have access to any of the premium features offered with the professional key for the Wubuntu operating system. And it is nothing more than a masked-up Linux operating system designed to catch gullible Windows users who might be vulnerable enough to fall into the trap that this operating system is a viable Windows alternative, and can replace Windows, which is rather sad, because Linux is all about creating freedom, and an open community, and by doing this, you're locking people into your distro in a way, but not to the extent that Microsoft or Apple locks down their users into their operating systems and ecosystems. Linux is completely free, and it is open source, and Wubuntu still offers a usable free edition, which is the edition I tested, and it does not appear to lack any necessary or game-changing features. So I would honestly not pay $35 for this distro. If I was to use it, I would use the free version, and for many reasons, I do not recommend this Linux distro for newcomers to Linux. The company is not trustworthy. They have been known to leak sensitive information which was provided by users who had purchased a copy of their operating system, and the developer's reaction to it was rather strange, and they still seem to have database leaks and breaches. So until they get that massive security flaw addressed, and perhaps reduce the price of their professional edition of this Linux distro, then I may revisit it and perhaps change my mind on it. But until that happens, I do not recommend you use this as your daily driver. If you want the real Windows 11 experience, just use goddamn Windows 11. I know that might mean purchasing newer hardware, or potentially installing Windows 11 on older computers. However, Microsoft recently introduced a new POP-CNT requirement. That basically means that if your PC does not meet this requirement, in other words, when your PC boots up, Windows does not detect the POP-CNT thing I am talking about, Windows 11 will not boot, no matter what you do. So those who are already using Windows 11 on unsupported hardware could be cut short of security updates, as well as new feature updates and improvements to Windows 11, so you users might need to plan a purchase, buy a PC which officially supports the Windows 11 minimum hardware requirements. If your PC uses an 8th generation processor or later, and meets the TPM 2.0 module requirements, you should be able to upgrade to Windows 11, or install a fresh copy of it. So, as much as this Linux distro is nice, and all the rest of it, it is a huge letdown in terms of functionality. I mean, having Copilot is great for artificial intelligence-related tasks, or tasks where artificial intelligence chatbots can really help you. For example, in an Office suite, you can use Microsoft Copilot to explain text in a way that you can understand it more easily, which might be handy if the text has complex or invigorating language. It can also help you grasp an idea of how a spreadsheet works, if you're doing spreadsheet-related stuff. and you can generate images for your presentations using the image creation tool built into Microsoft Copilot. So Copilot is actually quite nice when it comes to certain things. It actually is great, but not everyone needs or wants this chatbot on their system, and rightly so. Microsoft collects all data you sent through Copilot, which may also mean it's leaked to third parties without your permission. Microsoft already does this with Windows 11, but you can just install Microsoft Edge on any Linux distro. You do not need Wubuntu to pre-bundle it for you. Although this is convenient, it's not necessary, and many prefer Google Chrome, so a Linux distro should perhaps use Chromium, the open-source project which is the underlying base for many web browsers. Chromium is a lot like Chrome in terms of functionality, and it has great synchronization with Google accounts, so you can easily use your Google services on all your Linux devices using the Chromium browser, which might be great if you rely on Google products and services, and regularly need to use them. Apart from some things like look and feel, and the inclusion of some apps and services, Wubuntu is nothing but a failed attempt to get Windows users to switch to Linux, and while I do like this distro, I would not use it, especially due to privacy concerns surrounding user data being leaked by Linux FX. They will need to improve upon this before I will use it as a daily driver, and I recommend you do not use this as your daily driver, and you can get by with the free version. In fact, improve upon it, because you can install the software you need and want, which will make it suit your needs, provided the software you use is natively available for Linux. Anyway, that will do it for this video, folks. Please remember to like, share, comment, and subscribe. See you next video. Bye for now.